Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's really good to be here. It's been a while. She's quite right. And so to come back is really, I live in Oregon, so it's not like, I used to live kind of closer to this area. So anyway, yes, my subject is inclusive reason. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you how the esoteric philosophy understands this subject of inclusive reason and how it is an inescapable dimension of awareness that when you're on the path slowly, over time, you yourself become an agent of inclusive reason. In many ways, the whole path leading to enlightenment is actually a path that incrementally steps you into becoming more successful with this method of perceiving. So tonight I want to introduce you to this subject. We will have a section at the end where I'll open it up for questions. So if you do have questions, please hold off, and when we open it up, please ask, okay? So really, in a way, when we say inclusive reason, we're really talking about the dynamics that gradually develop when you are integrating both your mind and intuitive sensitivity. It really is very much about the blending of divine intuition with manas, or mind. And that is an essential feature of inclusive reason. The idea here is that instead of intuition being something that is quite separate from the mind, actually intuition can only be effective with the mind as its rightful interpreter. A lot of times people say, get your mind out of the way. You've heard this before. Get your mind out of the way. No, that's not correct. You don't want to get your mind out of the way. Sometimes people will say, well, the mind is the slayer of the real. Well, wait a minute. The slayer of the real, it's not that the mind is the slayer of the real. It's that the lower mind at times can be the slayer of the real. But what about the higher mind? And so one of the big distinctions in esotericism is that the mind is viewed in not a monolithic way, but that there's divisions to it. In fact, you've heard the expression, I'm of two minds. You've heard this. I'm of two minds. Actually, you're of three minds. Your mind is, your day-to-day mind, which we call the concrete mind, is your factual mind. It's the part of your mind that thinks linearly. It's the part of your mind that reasons step by step. And it is an essential factor of mind, even though it is primarily the mind associated with the personality, the lower self. But it's essential. Then you have your higher mind. Your higher mind is your abstract mind. Your higher mind is that part of your mind that tends to see the larger principles behind things. Your higher mind is sometimes called the blueprint realizing mind. It sees the underlying pattern, the philosophic foundation of things. Things that arise from your higher mind are normally things that have wide, broad application. Things that are focused in your concrete mind are more narrow and focused with greater specificity, and both are important. Our educational systems tend to emphasize the cultivation of the lower mind, but not so much the higher mind. Well, that's two parts of the mind, but there's a third. There's a third, is called the sun, S-O-N, of mind in the ancient literature, the sun of mind. And the sun of mind is the mind of the soul itself. The mind of the soul itself. And that your mental nature has these three divisions, and if you look at where does that sun of mind exist within you, it's found in the higher mind region, but it's still separate from the higher mind. So when we talk about inclusive reason, in many ways we're talking about intuition as it informs both the sun of mind, the soul itself, as well as higher mind, but it does not inform directly the lower mind. The lower mind is only influenced indirectly through the higher mind. So let's take a look at this. Maybe some of you in the Theosophical world have heard the term buddhimanas. Buddhimanas. Buddhi is pure intuition. Manas is mind. And in many ways, we're evolving more and more into Buddhi monastic consciousness, which is the same thing as inclusive reason. That's just another title for it. And that we are moving, before you're on the path, meaning before you have awakened to your higher consciousness, your causal body, your soul awareness, life is largely what we call kama monastic. Kama, K-A-M-A, is Sanskrit for desire, desire manas, desire mind. And so for the bulk of humanity, desire mind is the function and the natural process of thinking. But when you wake up on the path and you start recognizing these higher dimensions of consciousness, well, then you start to realize that there's a shift that's trying to take place. And you're starting to realize that there is that the desire part of your emotional body is getting in the way of that higher Buddhi quality, that is to say, true intuition, true intuition. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how to recognize what we mean by intuition and what we mean by mind, and talk about their combination. So that's part of what I want to share with you today. But I also want to share with you what are the things inside each of us that get in the way, get in the way of more of that Buddhi monastic consciousness coming through, more of that inclusive reason. And that's the subject having to do with what we call the veils of illusion. The veils of illusion. The veils of illusion are, they're recognized as anticipated natural distortions that arise in your personality. And there are three dimensions to your personality. There's a mental nature, which I've talked about, your lower mind. There's your emotional nature, and then there's, of course, your physical. And all three of those are sometimes we call it the threefold personality for that reason. But all of them have distorting tendencies. And each of us will have some measures of distortions or these illusions, these veils that limit the path, limit your awareness. And in many ways, the path could be understood as a gradual process of lifting those veils one by one as you move forward toward more true Buddhi monastic consciousness. And so in many ways, we want to look at what do we mean by those veils. And there are three types of veils, broad categories. There are veils that pertain to your relationship to your physical body, your physical appetites, and how you view the outer world physically. There are veils that pertain to your emotional life that have distorting potential. And there are veils that pertain to your concrete mental life. And so we want to look at that as well. And I knowing myself here, I'll probably tie in things like understanding how does this subject relate to initiation? How does this subject relate to the 7 rays? You're going to see that it ties into a lot of things. So let's first talk about what do we mean by pure intuition, because that's a term that is used very loosely in the society. You know, what a lot of people call intuition, from an esoteric point of view, that's not intuition. That's high-level emotion that you are interpreting it as intuition. You see, even people will often say, and again, I'm not speaking of you per tape, but I'm speaking of people not yet on the path at all, which would be the masses, that people say, you know, I have a gut feeling, and they kind of interpret that as an intuitive realization. Well, gut, they're talking about, that's solar plexus. That's feeling, that's emotion. That's not intuition. True intuition, true Buddhic impression is way beyond emotion. It's even beyond thought. It's so deep, so subtle. So when we talk about the Buddhic plane, and we talk about divine intuition, we're not talking about that sort of thing, the sort of the gut feeling stuff that people have. And that's not to say that there isn't value in recognizing gut feeling. But it's understood that the reason why we misinterpret that is because your emotional body tends to be of a nature that naturally receives a reflection from the intuitive plane. It is said that alternate planes of consciousness reflect each other. So if you've got, there's 7 planes, as you know. I'll just start from the 4th plane down. 4th plane is pure intuition, true intuition, then the mental plane, then the emotional plane, then the physical. Well, the emotional and the intuitive plane, the Buddhic plane, they have the mental in between. And yet there's a natural reflection. And so it's anticipated, it's understood that people are going to have that reflection and easily confuse it for an intuition. But the real intuitions we're talking about are utterly formless. They are intuitions that ultimately come from the inner ashram. Let me explain that for a moment. You know, we hear the word ashram, and a lot of times we think of some place in India. And look, there's probably some really good things to do in India having to do with ashramic experience. But that's really not the ashram in the truest sense. The ashram in the truest sense is not in India. And dare I say, it's not in Wheaton either, okay? It's not here either. Where is it? It's deep inside. It's on that Buddhic plane. And that your soul issues forth from an inner ashram. Your soul is being guided by the impulses coming from a particular type of ashram. And those ashrams, there are said to be 7 of them. 7 ashrams. All of them are on the Buddhic plane. All of them are deeper than the soul itself. And each one has a relationship to one of the 7 rays. And so to know your soul ray is to know something about the nature of the intuitions that come forth and can be recognized within your consciousness. So for instance, as an example, let us say that a person has what we call a 5th ray soul. Now, 5th ray is called the ray of science. So a person with a 5th ray soul is going to receive intuitions that are going to try to impress the mind, and those intuitions are going to have something to do with a deeper understanding of scientific truth. It's not going to have anything to do with religion. It's not going to have anything to do with government, because that's not the line that it's in. So also understand that when we talk about intuitions, they are categorically defined according to the ray nature of your inner constitution and the ashramic affiliations that your soul has. But they're utterly 100% formless. And if they're truly coming from that inner ashram, they are also 100% impersonal. Put another way, I guarantee you, the ashram is not sending you any messages saying, here are the numbers to win the lottery. I promise. That's how it works, okay? It's not how it works. So the whole process is to see the mind as the agency that builds form out of a formless intuition. Before you're on the path, the mind, now I'm using the mind in a more generic, wider way, mind tends to be very focused in one direction, meaning I'm thinking and I'm going to apply that thought here out in my life. Okay. When you awaken to your soul, when you awaken to your higher consciousness, then what happens is you're slowly realizing that the mind has 2 functions. It has 2 orientations that are available to you. There is still that use my thought to do something in the outer world, but subtler than that, the mind becomes an agent of reception. So it becomes receptive to the downflow of intuitive insight coming from the Buddhic plane. So one of the big characteristics of stepping onto the path is the shift from the mind as a singular focused direction of it to a bidirectional. One is assertive and one is receptive. And it's the receptive part that we're talking about. And that has to do with the process of building thought forms, the art of building thought forms. You see, what happens is this. I'll try to give you a kind of an overview of how the physics of this, how this works. So, and even though it's going to sound like this is not a personality thing, the personality has to be in the game consciously nonetheless. So for instance, when your personality, your lower self, has really committed itself meditatively, let's say, to aligning with the soul and beyond, and the soul itself is attending downward toward you and it's trying to deliver these formless intuitions, that it is said that deep inside those, you might say, a downward gazing soul and an upward gazing personality, when that's really happen, it is said that those two come together and a point of light emerges deep in consciousness, a point of light. And that point of light is not a thought. It's the seed or the germ of a thought to be. It's not yet a thought. And what happens is that we're now beginning the process of inclusive reason. The intuition itself is utterly impersonal, truly inclusive, big picture, but you need the mind to be receptive and to build thought forms that represent the formless intuitions that it's sensing. Are you with me, everybody? Are you tracking this? Okay. Now, what happens is, as that point of light is formed within you, and by the way, it doesn't mean that you literally see internally a point of light, although perhaps there are some people that do see that, but basically it's just a phrase to highlight the seed of a thought to be. Now what happens is that that point of light is said to have properties associated with it. It is said that that point of light, which is the united energy of soul and personality together, that point of light radiates into the mental plane color, vibration, notes. Now, the mental plane and your mental body is made up of elemental substance. Now, what do we mean by that? So all planes are really planes of living, intelligent substance. All of your vehicles are living, intelligent substance. If I cut my hand, it heals itself. That's an intelligence. If I have a feeling condition, it could be a base feeling, could be a lofty feeling. That's a different type of intelligent substance, and the product of that is feeling itself, an emotion. But the same is true with thought. When you have when that point of light, what it does is it radiates those vibrations into the mental body and the mental plane. Now, in the physics of this, the mental plane is filled with living elementals, mental elementals. And those elementals are negative in the sense that they respond to vibration. And according to the nature of the point of light, those little elementals begin to draw toward that point of light like moths to a flame. And they begin to build an edifice, build a thought, build a structure. And when enough of those elementals have come together to build an edifice, you the thinker, you the creator, you the meditator, you say to yourself, I got a new idea. So what is a thought? A thought, spiritually understood, represents the assemblage of a myriad of little lives that come together in cooperative rapport to create a thought form that makes it possible for you, the perceiver, to perceive it. Because, as my teacher used to say, for us, at our level of development, consciousness, as we understand consciousness, doesn't exist without the perception of a thing. And a thought is a thing. It's got characteristics. It's got attributes. It's attributable. A thought is this, but not that, you see. So this is the physics of thought form building. Thought form building. And it's one of the main functions of the mind, particularly when you're on the path. And if it is indeed related to the soul's effort to transmit something from the inner ashram to your personality, if that is the case, then the thought that starts to arise within you will be inclusive. In other words, it will have the flavor of a big picture perspective. It will be impersonal. It won't tell you what the lottery numbers are, but it'll be impersonal, and it is something that, how to put this, it is something that gives you impulse to serve humanity. You see, the soul itself is governed by several laws. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them, the third law, is important here. And that's called the law of service. Every soul wants to transmit its intuitive wisdom. It wants to transmit it into the personality, the lower self. It wants to do it without the personality getting in the way. And therein is the challenge. And in so doing, it wants to make an uplifting contribution to something beyond itself. And that's service. And that's what inclusive reason tends to bring to us. It tends to bring to us a deeper sense of responsibility to live one's life as a function of supporting the betterment of something beyond your personal life. And that's so crucial, friends, so crucial, recognizing that this kind of Buddhi monastic consciousness is also facilitating a heightened urge to serve, a heightened urge to utilize the insights gained and bring that out into the world within the context of your real life. And recognize that that idea will have uplifting value somewhere. And it will be very much defined by, as I said earlier, the ray that you're on, the ray that you're on. So all of this is part of the art of thought form building, the art of thought form building. And the further you are on the path, the more often you will experience inclusive reason. And when you always experience inclusive reason or Buddhi monastic consciousness, when you finally get to that point, you're given another name. Yeah, you're given another name. You're called the Master. The Master. You see, true full participation in inclusive reason, Buddhi monastic consciousness under all conditions, is what it means to be a master, because you've mastered the inner process, you see. And it also means that you've eliminated all of the lower self patterns of interference, the illusions I mentioned earlier, you see. So in a certain sense, where you stand on the path has a direct relationship to the measure of inclusive reason that is shaping itself within your day-to-day consciousness. Okay? Now, as I said, there is, knowing that that is where it's all going, that's where it's all going for each one of us in this room. There are these illusions that we need to talk about. The veils of illusion. There are mental veils, there are emotional veils, and there are physical veils. And these are the very things that prevent us from having a fuller experience of inclusive reason. Sometimes in some of the literature, they'll talk about these veils as being, sometimes the mental veils are called illusions, sometimes the emotional veils are called glamour, and sometimes the physical veils are called maya. But in the larger context, they're all just saying there's some distortion here. And in many ways, the path has to do with lifting these veils and transforming these distorting tendencies within the lower self. And that correlates to also where you are on the path. How many veils have you lifted? What are the veils that have been lifted? And you have to think about this in a multi-incarnational way, by the way, okay? You've lifted many veils, and many of them probably were lifted in a previous life, but we all have more to go, I guarantee you. I guarantee you. So the veils of illusion are interesting. There's another name. Sometimes they're called the curtains of impediment. The curtains of impediment, okay? So what are some of these veils? Well, there's veils according on a physical level, what sometimes we call Maya, where it's a distortion that has to do with your relationship to your physical body and its physical appetites, and how you relate to your physical urges. And there's distorting tendencies there. Our relationship to food, our relationship to sexuality, our relationship to just the day-to-day physical way of organizing our life, all of these have potential veils of distortion that prevent us from bringing more of the best of us forward. A lot of those veils are lifted as you are taking what we call the first initiation. Out of curiosity, how many of you are familiar with the initiations in here? I'm just kind of want to get a feel for it. Okay, several of you. Well, so the first initiation has so much to do with a relative mastery over the physical instrument. It doesn't mean that you don't have a need for food. It doesn't mean that you don't have a sexual life. But what it does mean is that you've come to a place where you're able to recognize those appetites, and at the same time, a deeper part of you maintains a kind of observer, a kind of it has oversight regulatory capacity. And so you don't lose yourself in the appetite. Another part of you is constantly behind going, interesting. And so the point is that you maintain a sense of the observer. Now, when you're able to do that for a given amount of time, it means that you've successfully begun to lift and seriously lifted some veils having to do with that very thing. Your attitude toward food, your attitude toward sexuality, as an example. That veil is finally lifted, and you then qualify for the first initiation. So as I'm saying this, I'm hoping you're realizing that initiation itself is tied into this as well, you see? It's also your physical life, not just your physical appetites, but your physical life. You've got, how well do we organize our life? How well do we coordinate our day? How well are we efficient in the use of our physical instruments as a function of service in the outer world? All of that is really part of what it means to lift those veils. The emotional veils are very important as well. A lot of the emotional veils have to do with exaggerated feeling conditions. And the idea that the emotional body has undue sway over your inclinations, your tendencies toward this versus that behavior. The emotional body is an important instrument, but it requires a certain mastery. And it's very correlated with the second initiation. To actually become a second degree initiate means that you've lifted many of the veils having to do with the emotional distortions within your emotional instrument. Oftentimes it has to do with things that deal with either exaggerated emotion, or it can even represent things like, how to put this, putting too much emotion into something that's important to you. And by doing that, and that's automatic, by doing that, you actually begin to distort the very thing that you've put the emotion into. You can make a mountain out of a molehill by just adding too much feeling to it. You really can. And that distorts, and that's a glamour. And that glamour prevents some measure of added inclusive reasoning in your process. So there's a correlation here, and that's my point. You see? It's all about learning how to use emotion and not be used by emotion. That's the story of the second initiation in a nutshell. How can we utilize our instrumentation and not be used by it? That's the whole path, friends. It really is. Your personality in its three parts, the mental portion, the emotional portion, the physical, all of that is in actuality nothing but an instrument destined to be utilized by the soul as its outer garment of service in the world. But the great challenge for all of us is that that personality, that lower self, has a mind of its own. And it thinks it's an independent agent. It doesn't realize that it's merely an appendage. And so much of the path has to do with disidentifying with those three parts of you, but without any repression. So the glamours associated with the emotional body, for instance, those glamours are really glamours that arise because we have overly identified with feeling states rather than having feeling states but remaining detached from them. And that's the key here. So the whole path is about incrementally developing the observer on deeper and deeper levels. And that second initiation is a tough one because there's so much, we have so much vested interest in our feeling states. But eventually, you will become more masterful of that. That curtain, that veil will be lifted. But keep in mind, it has nothing to do with repression of emotion. Many psychologists know that pushing emotion down is actually harmful in other ways. It comes back in other forms, other pathologies. But when we talk about this, we're talking about finding a deeper place inside you where you can deliberately relate to your emotions, actually deliberately engage in your emotions without repression and still maintain that observer. As a great master once said, and I paraphrase a little bit, but it's essentially this. He says, when it comes to your spiritual development, always remember that in the deep place within you, you are the director on the stool. You're the director on the stool. Never leave the stool to become one of the characters on the stage. You're the director on the stool. Don't leave the stool. Meaning, what are the characters on the stage? Emotional tendencies, physical appetites, personality thoughts. Those are the characters on the stage. None of those are really you. You're the director on the stool. But the tendency is to jump off the stool and join the characters. You still with me, everybody? You getting this? And so that in a way, it's all about learning where the stool is, inside. Where is that? Where is that place that I'm supposed to hold myself? Because that's the antidote to the veils of illusion, but it's also the guarantee of further cultivation of inclusive reason. You're the director on the stool. In a way, friends, the whole path to continuous inclusive reason and the lifting of the veils is to slowly learn how to be in two places at one time. How to be in your day-to-day consciousness and simultaneously sensing a deeper, expansive stillness deep within. How to be high and in the low place at the same time. How to be in a field deep inside that feels expansive, and it's as if you're in a field of universality while simultaneously effectively working within the field of particularity. That's what it means to be a master. Sometimes that's called full spectrum consciousness. To be both high and low at the same time. To be in a place where you can hold two quite distinctly different perceptual processes simultaneously. Now, when I say universalness, what I'm really saying is that, and many of you are meditators, you probably have sensed this, where when you go deep enough, you start to feel like you're connected to all things. You feel that expansiveness. You feel like you're in a kind of field of widening identification with the all. And that's great. But now can you also carry that out of meditation and hold a sense of that while at the same time thinking, feeling, acting, serving, and B, holding the two at the same time. And that's what inclusive reason is really about. To be in two places at one time. So, you also have distortions in your lower mind, too. Analytical thinking is important. We all need analytical thought, but analytical thought is also the type of thought that is most separative, whereas the higher mind produces thoughts from intuitions that are unitive. The lower mind emphasizes separative consciousness. In fact, that's a distinction. The personality, its mind is more separative. The soul, its mind is more unitive. The personality mind is the mind that looks out and says at another person or a situation and says, I'm different than you. The soul is the part of you that looks out and says, I see myself in you. And then if you go further, do you all know what the monad is? You know what monad is? Monad is pure spirit, beyond soul. Not conscious to us, but the day will come. A master lives not from a soul perspective, a master lives from a monadic perspective. On that level, when you're that far along the path, it's different than the soul's view and the personality. Personality says, I'm different than you. Soul, the mind of the soul says, I see myself in you. The monad says, I am you. I am you. And you are me. Because there's only one thing. Universal isness. You see? So in many ways, the process of moving toward inclusive reason is a process of moving from separative consciousness to unitive consciousness to what we call synthetic consciousness. That's the big step for all of us. When you became a human being, you know, the human kingdom emerged, according to Blavatsky, it's called the phase of individualization, where, and they often give the number of 18 million years ago, that as the human kingdom emerged, and for countless incarnations, the whole goal of evolution was to cultivate separative consciousness, individualized consciousness, in order to rise above the long history of life lived instinctually through the animal kingdom, which is instinctual consciousness. But then, you had your awakening. You have the awakening. And I'm telling you, the awakening is such a pivotal time because for the first time, you awaken to your causal body, to the soul itself. Essentially, you discover your duality deep inside. You discover that there is a higher part of you and a lower part of you. You discover that inner duality. And you begin another journey over many lifetimes. And you move out of the field of separative consciousness and into what we call the field of unitive consciousness. And when we talk about the path in this philosophy and the steps leading to enlightenment, we're talking about this phase of the cultivation of unitive consciousness through the realization of the higher and lower part of yourself. And now we're starting to do the deliberate work of lifting the veils. You see, those veils that I shared with you, and those are just a few of the huge number of veils, those veils are not recognizable until you've awoken to your higher promptings. For the masses, they don't see that. Why? Because they don't have a higher part of them that has the capacity to observe and see it. You have to have a part of you away from it in order to see it. And until that happens, it just is, you see? So that's an important concept here, that it's in that middle phase that we awaken to the veils of illusion and start the more deliberate work of transforming these veils so that we can live more of that higher part of us, become more receptive to the intuitions coming through the causal body of the soul. And that takes several lifetimes. And what we call initiation the first three particularly are right there in that phase. The first is the probationary path, and the first initiation, the second initiation, and the third initiation. And then the final phase is the field of synthesis. Separative consciousness eventually evolves toward unitive consciousness, which eventually steps you into synthetic consciousness, or synthesis, or universality. Those are the big steps. And when you get into this universality phase, which doesn't happen, you get the first real participation in it in a kind of conscious way at the transfiguration. That's the third initiation. And then the fourth and fifth initiations, you're completely absorbed in it, and you become a master. You become a master. So that's a simple model of the three big phases of evolution from primitive human being to enlightened master, and the whole idea of lifting these veils in order to have more inclusive reason. The whole idea of that occurs mostly in that middle phase. And I would suspect that most, if not all of you in this room, are joining me in that middle phase, you see. But until we see a higher and lower part of us, we're never going to see those veils because there's nothing to contrast it with. By the way, I should mention that the veils, the types of glamours and distortions and veils in the personality, I've just given you a couple little things. You know, some of the most common veils are things like the glamour of materiality is a very common veil in the world today, which has led to materialism. The glamour of sentimentality is a big one. And one of the masters said, the glamour of sentimentality holds the good people of the world in thraldom. The idea of sentimentality meaning looking at others and sort of scratching each other's back to make sure that everybody's happy and you're happy with them and they're happy with you. Another big glamour is the glamour of the love of being loved. The love of being loved. That's a second-ray glamour. Oh, I forgot to mention that. All of the rays have a whole gamut of types of glamours. So when you study the glamours associated with the 7 rays, when you start to recognize a lot of them in yourself, it actually helps point you to what ray you're on. Sometimes you know what your ray is more through the recognition of the glamours than the purity of the ray. So it's a huge study, and a fascinating study, really. And even astrology, every sign of the zodiac has glamours associated with the sign. You're going to get glamours with your moon sign, your sun sign, and your rising sign, for sure. So that's also a variable in it. So it's a big subject, as you can see. But the glamour of sentimentality is a really big one that many people get caught up on. The desire to be liked, the love of being liked. A couple other good examples of glamour would be, for instance, the glamour of psychic impression. The glamour that says, you know, I had something that just came to me, and it must be an important thing. Why? Because it came to me. Without any kind of reasoning through, like, could it be that maybe you did sense something, but does that mean that it's accurate? Does that mean that you've built thought forms correctly around it? The glamour of psychic impression is rampant in the world today. There's the glamour of the intellect, glamour of, or intellectual pride. I'm special because I'm really smart. That's a glamour. There's the glamour of idealism, the glamour of devotion. These are just examples. The glamour of devotion. One of the glamour that has been discussed as the most poisonous of all the glamours is called the glamour of suspicion. The glamour of suspicion. And out of that comes a rise in conspiratorial thinking, too. So there's a lot to this subject, but understand that every time we have a breakthrough in ourselves around these glamours. Every time you see something in yourself and you face it and you do the work of lifting it out and transforming it within you, you become more effective in your capacity to inclusively reason, which means that you become much more effective as a servant on behalf of the inner ashram. I mentioned earlier, and just now, the importance of service as a function of living a spiritual life. But also keep in mind that we are in a very interesting time right now. I don't know, have you noticed? It's kind of, maybe it's just me, but it seems pretty crazy out there, okay? And it's crazy because, well, there's a lot of reasons for it, but the two major reasons are, there's a rheological reason and an astrological reason. The astrological reason is that we are in a transition between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, and they have an overlap of approximately, people debate this, but it can be as much as 200 years. And we're about at the middle of the overlap. We won't be in the age of Aquarius, we won't be into the age of Aquarius with no Pisces. We won't be there until the year 2117. 2117. We're at the midway point in that 200-year period. And that's where you're going to have the greatest polarities, because two energetic systems, astrological systems, are shaping the collective consciousness of humanity at the same time. And people have a natural proclivity to identify with one pattern over another. And that's causing heightened polarization between these two categories of people. And that's why we see so much polarization, not a lot of middle ground anymore. So that's one of the causes of the crisis in the world today. Another is rheological. We are moving from a 6th ray age to a 7th ray age. And that too is an overlap. And that too creates another level of polarization. And so we are in a major transition here. And the crisis is sometimes called the period of the burning ground. The period of the burning ground. And humanity is walking across hot coals right now. And everybody's involved. But interestingly, there are what we call there's a couple different names, but one of the names is the forerunners of the light that are also in greater number than ever before. The forerunners of the light, I'll define it for you. They represent the sum total of all people on the planet today who have had some measure of awakening to their own soul, who have not only some sense of that, but recognize that they want to bring more of that soulful quality into outer expression through their personality, and they want to do that, but they realize that the personality, they had to work on their personality to become more effective at that. In other words, start lifting these veils. And in so doing, they can therefore more effectively serve the greater whole. In total, that's called the new group of world servers. It's also called the forerunners of the light. They're in their millions now in the world. They're found in every country, men and women, found in every social, economic strata, from rich to poor, from people of different religious background or no religious background, and all inwardly are committed to the oneness of humanity and committing their lives to living in a way that improves the human condition. In total, that group is very powerful. And if you want to know who they are, well, I just have one thing to say. Ta-da! It's you. To the extent that your heart is ablaze with Christ, to the extent that you've lifted some of those veils, not all of them, you'd have to be a master to say that, but some of them, and to the extent that you are committing your wisdom and your love and your life to living as an agent of service on behalf of the greater whole. you're a member. And a lot of the transition of the world today is resting upon the shoulders of the forerunners. Have I put a weight on your shoulder? If I have, I feel successful, actually. But it's so important to realize, this is another theme that I'm going to share with you because it ties into all of this, is that we are told in this profound philosophy that the ashrams, together all the 7 ashrams, that's called the hierarchy of masters. The masters we talk about, Master Morya, Master Kuthumi, Master Jesus, Master Serapis Bey, all of the main masters that we talk about in this philosophy are deeply connected to this. But the idea here is that it is said that that whole ashram, all the ashrams together, and Sanat Kumara. Do you folks know who Sanat Kumara is? Sanat Kumara? Sanat Kumara is the Theosophical name of the being that is the ensouling agency of the whole planet. You see, in esotericism, the earth is not just a rock, it's a being. It's alive. And it has a soul, and it has a personality, just as all of humanity has a soul and that personality. And right now, that soul and that personality of humanity are at war with each other. They're in conflict. But the whole planet has it. So Sanat Kumara, the Christ, all the masters of wisdom, the 4 Maharaja lords, they're called the Lapika lords, they're also called the lords of karma. The 7 spirits before the throne, these are just names of vast beings that are said to be related to this planet. All of them meet in conclave once every 100 years. Once every 100 years. And always in the same year of the century. It's always the 25th year of the century, friends. This is the year, it's called the conclave. It's called the conclave. It's huge. It's huge. And this conclave is said to be taking place this year. And it is said that the masters are trying to make decisions about how to help humanity forward for the next 100 years. And they, as a result of that, will be trying to impress, using intuition, disciples' consciousness with new patterns of intuitive thought that will help humanity move forward in a much more positive way over the next many decades. And if that is true, you can see why the cultivation of inclusive reason now is so important for all of us. Because the more you can hold those two things at the same time, being high and low at the same time, being in a vast universal consciousness and effective in the world of particularity, the more you can hold those two things together, the more you become a more effective agent on behalf of what they are trying to do this year. And these conclaves, I remember, I'll tell you, it's a kind of fun story. I started studying this philosophy maybe 40 years ago. And I remember when I first read about the conclave and that 2025, this is a long time ago, 2025, I'm like, 2025, wow, that's amazing. I wonder if I'll live long enough. Evidence suggests that I made it. Okay. But here we are. This is the year. This is the most important year of your life from a spiritual perspective, because you are needed more now than ever before. Your heart, your wisdom, your tendency to be willing to receive intuitive impression to support humanity in your own way, in your own circumstance, is higher now than it has ever been and will ever be in our lives in this incarnation. And that ties into the forerunners, the new group of world service, because that whole group, now in their millions, by the way, it is said that the masters look at that whole group and they give it another name. They call it the world disciple, as if it's a single entity, the world disciple. And we are even given hints in terms of how does these previous conclaves had it made a difference? Now, when I have a whole seminar I'm going to be doing in Pittsburgh called The Gathering, where the whole weekend is devoted to this subject. But essentially, we can go back to all the way to 1425 in that conclave, 1525, 1625. So, for instance, as an example, and I don't want to go too far into this, except to say that the conclave of 1825 ultimately was what perpetuated the rise of the labor movements around the world. It also created it supported the idea of the birth and the development of the Industrial Revolution that started in the Midlands of England. In the 1700s, that's when we had that 1725 launched a whole trend toward the Enlightened movement. It opened the door to a whole level of creativity and also a separation or a note of resistance against the authority of the church and the dogmatic authority of the church. So huge things, but that ultimately, it takes years to precipitate it, but the note is set on the 25th year of every century, and that's now. And right now, that conclave is happening on the highest plane. If you look at the 7 planes, the highest plane is the plane of Adi, and that's also where Shambhala is. Do you know what Shambhala is? Shambhala is beyond the hierarchy of masters. Shambhala is said to be the place deep inside where the will of the Logos, the will of the planetary being, resides. Shambhala is the crown chakra to our planet. The hierarchy of masters is the heart chakra to our planet. The human kingdom is the throat chakra to our planet. So kingdoms of nature are actually manifestations of chakra vibrations inherent in the globe itself, in the planet itself. So that's where this conclave is happening, at the highest plane. Because I've had people ask me, I've done this 2-day seminar in Ireland, England, New Zealand, Australia, Seattle, and every place somebody asks, well, where is it at? Where are they meeting? And I jokingly say, I guarantee you it's not a Hilton hotel. Guaranteed. They meet in conclave at the highest plane. And this is the highest representatives of life on this planet. And at the same time, the lowest plane, the physical, we got a nightmare out here. And that's part of the physics of it. That's part of the physics. So you have the highest center of possibilities and spiritual advancement in contrast to the lowest plane and the crisis that's going on in the world today. And that's not an accident. That's just in the physics. The darkness meets the light meets the darkness. And who's in the middle ground? You and I. Humanity. Humanity is the battleground. Because those two forces, darkness and light, are playing out in each of us. In each of us. I only bring this up because I guess what I'm really trying to say is that your capacity to cultivate this process of being in two places at one time, inclusive reason, is what makes you more receptive to those promptings that are trying to come forward from this conclave. And you become a much more valuable servant in support of their work. And nothing's more important than that. Because truthfully, you are needed now more than any other time in your life from a spiritual perspective. So I encourage you all to think about what are your glamours? What are some of the veils in your consciousness? How does your lower self get in the way? And what can you do to lift that veil? Because I have no doubt, that if you can really do that work and really become more sensitive to the downflow of intuitive light coming from the inner ashram, I have no doubt that the masters of wisdom will be pleased and the Christ will smile.